Ladies and gentlemen, as a courtesy to those seated around you, please make sure all cellular phones and pagers have been turned off. Attention please. Today's program is about to begin. Please take your seats.
Put the scouts out for the NATO rep. Okay, well, thank you for all coming back and joining us for a senior officer panel. We have a rich panel this discussion today. It's really my pleasure to host these folks. They're all really ranking members within their own services and key players for us, and you'll find a lot of training in their call signs and their names, so and their titles. So just to set up the situation, we had a couple of really great keynotes this morning, and General Wilson certainly gave us some charge and challenges. And he pointed out that we're returning to a complex environment from the threat. We've got the Iran, Korea, and then the Russian and the Chinese situation, which he really eloquently outlined the challenges there, and I thought really we need to put our thinking caps on that one. We've had some success against ISIS and terrorism, but it's still out there and remains a threat, I think, very long term. Lots of other issues like immigration and social issues that are challenging us, as well as challenging the force. We've got things like suicide rates within the services, which are really unacceptable, and some key readiness issues that have been the focus of the chiefs for the last couple of years. Hopefully we'll talk about that today. But our nation keeps being blessed with some fairly robust funding for the Defense Department in the last several years, and so we are looking forward to discussing how some of that may have come to benefit. Our leader panel will address some of those challenges, as well as things that are hurting their heads and their lanes, and also within the context of this year's theme, winning the war of cognition by pushing readiness and lethality. And I think that readiness is a big part of what we do at ITSEC, and it's something that we're happy that it's been a focus, and hopefully it will remain so. This year we have representatives from OSD, all the services, and NATO, so that's a blessing for us. The ROE for this event will be, I will introduce the panel, then we'll do opening remarks, essentially, as we go down the dais. During that time, the staff will be going around with some question cards. So appreciate, raise your hand, they'll give you a card. early on and then collect those. And then my request is that they are simple questions, that they're on one side of the sheet, that they're respectful, and that they also include a question. So I appreciate that. So as we get going, I will, my pleasure to really begin introducing the panel as we go. First off, we've got Fred Drummond, who's been here a couple times now. We appreciate your coming back. He's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Education and Training. In his role, he oversees the development and policies and plans for military training and education throughout OSD. His responsibilities include service and joint training policy, cyber training policy, joint professional military training, training capability modernization, enabling access to land, air, and sea ranges. So please help me welcome Mr. Drummond. Next, a good friend of mine and comrade in arms in terms of the Navy side is Vice Admiral Miller, call sign Bullet. I'm not sure how he got that, but I'm sure it was lethal. He's the commander of the Naval Air Forces, Commander Naval Air Forces U.S. Pacific Fleet. He essentially oversees the Naval Aviation Enterprise, which is the whole breadth of everything naval aviation. So he became the Air Boss, which is an affectionate term for his leadership, in January of 2018. He was an attack pilot and a strike fighter pilot, commanded at the squadron level and went on to nuclear power school, executive officer of the Carl Vinson, and commanded the great ship George H.W. Bush. He was also a Carrier Strike Group commander during Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Resolve. Please help me welcome Bullet. Next we have Major General Jake Jacobson. He's the Director of Training and Readiness for the Air Staff as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at the headquarters. This directorate encompasses 7 divisions and the Air Force Agency for Modeling Simulation, which is AFMS here in Orlando. He's responsible for policy, guidance, and oversight of Air Force operational training infrastructure, officer enlisted operations, career field management, operation readiness and reporting, and aircrew management. He's a command pilot with more than 4,000 hours in a variety of airplanes and has flown combat missions in Desert Shield, Allied Force, and Enduring Freedom. So please help me welcome Jake Jacobson. Next on the dais, we have another returnee, I believe, doubleheader, Major General Bill Mullen. He's the commanding general, USMC Training and Education Command, so they're, again, the right guy for the job here. He has served as the commanding general, Education Command, and President, Marine Corps University for quite a long time. He was a Division Plans Officer, the 2nd Marine Division, the Operation Officer for Regimental Combat Team 8, deployed to Fallujah for a year during the early 2000s, commanded the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines, and returned to Fallujah, commanded the Marine Corps Tactics and Operations Group in 2009, and he was Marine Corps aide to the President, so that's a difficult job. So please help me welcome General Mullen. Next we have Brigadier General Stephen Michael from the Army, our Army rep. He's a career infantry officer, commanded at the battalion, regiment, brigade, combat team level. He was Deputy Commanding General for Operations of the 25th Infantry in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. Tough job going out. It's a G357 for U.S. Army Pacific and the J5 for the Indo-Pacific Command, which is a whole bunch of tours in Hawaii. That's a tough life. If you read his bio in the program, you'd be impressed with all the deployments. I won't cover them all, but he went to Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, in response to the Khobar Towers bombings, and he's was in Iraqi Freedom 1, conducting night parachute drops into northern Iraq. So he's got a whole host of places that he's been, so it seems like continually deployed. So please help me welcome Brigadier General Stephen Michael. We have, from our NATO rep today, we have Brigadier General Ilmars Lejnič. He's from the Latvian Armed Forces. He's the Assistant Chief of Staff for Capability Engineering and Innovation at the Supreme Allied Command Transformation. That's in the Norfolk area. He was born in Latvia, but made it to California in 1971. Grew up later in Sweden, was schooled in West Germany, and then went back to Latvia. So he's been around in his youth. His career with troops has been at every level up to brigade command, and he assumed the rewarding task of setting up an armed force level professional NCO training system, as well as taking up command of that newly founded NCO Academy. He commanded the 2nd Infantry Battalion, and he served in another variety of roles, deployed both to Kandahar, Afghanistan, and to other areas in the Middle East. So he commanded the Land Forces Mechanized Infantry Brigade, and we're really pleased to have you with us. So please help me welcome Brigadier General Ilmar Lejnič. So Ilmar, how to do with the name? Okay, pretty good? Not too good? Okay. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to go down the panel for their opening remarks, and we'll start with Mr. Fred Drummond.
Thank you. I'm assuming we're on? Yes. I'd like to start off with my chain of command to add some context to here. So I'm Force Education and Training, as Admiral Robb mentioned, but it also includes some other portfolios to include language. Language is a readiness aspect, a capability also. But I report directly to the Honorable Veronica Daigle, who is Assistant Secretary of Defense for Readiness, who in turn reports to Mr. Jimmy Stewart, who is ASD MNRA, performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So that constant recurring theme of readiness and the tie-in to people. So for my portfolios, one of the very first questions I got into, and I think I mentioned this last year, is, okay, what does force education and training have to do with readiness? Well, it's about people, it's about capabilities, and people are our readiness. And in today's Department of Defense, guided by the National Defense Strategy, where lethality and readiness are the key words, we are literally asked every week from our programs, how do they contribute to lethality and readiness? How do your programs contribute to combat capability? How are your programs contributing to increasing our combat capability? So that is literally what we are briefing the Secretary of Defense on a weekly basis. It's a terrific opportunity for especially some of my programs, to give visibility to our capabilities for our people, and in turn our combat capabilities that probably don't get briefed at that high level. So we're in a window of opportunity which is continuing, and I believe will pay off, as it has right now already. I'd also like to add a little bit of context for everything that my office does, and Veronica's office above me is the training context, where we're looking at across the board from the department, the services, and our allied partners, interoperability and commonality. To train like we're going to fight, we have to have those two components. So that underpins everything that we look at across ASDR and within the PNR readiness matrix. So for today, I'd like to focus briefly on two particular focus areas: live virtual constructive, LVC, and emerging technologies, and I'm going to use 5G as the key component here for that. There will be some sub-bullets for that. Also, I'd like to reference Mark Matthews' comments on the learning aspect for our service members, because what I'm going to talk about with LVC and the ability of what emerging technology is bringing us, it really comes down to the learning capabilities, learning opportunities for our service members. It's always about them because they are our combat arms, our combat effectiveness. So I mentioned that in my previous time here, but again, that's one of those underpinning foundational things. I was very happy to hear Mr. Matthews' comments in recognition of that. I really appreciate it when somebody coming from outside the DoD certainly sees and recognizes that as to make that a priority. So why LVC? I really probably don't have to say that to this audience. We have real-world constraints. We have advanced weapon systems that we're only going to be able to train in a virtual world for security reasons, for physical range reasons, airspace considerations, to get the full maximum capability of our systems to prepare our folks to go potentially in the combat. We have to go into this world. It's what the services are doing. I believe you'll hear some of those examples today, certainly throughout the time here. You'll see the demonstrations of that, of course, by many of you on the floor with your displays and presentations. So from an OSD standpoint, we're looking at how to ensure, align the strategic direction. Again, the interoperability and commonality aspects. So I'll put out a particular plug here for this, which we are bringing up the chain and looking to brief to the highest levels. Need a one world geodatabase. We cannot have, the example I brought last time, a Marine helicopter training scenario synced up with an Army scenario, and the Marine helicopter lands 10 feet underground in that Army context. Can't have that. So have to have the one world geodatabase. In my mind, it would be NGA. We'll go from there, and there are the technologies enabling us then to, you don't need to refine it to the same level for everybody. So it's scalable, but that's where we need to be, one literal ground truth. The other aspect is we need one world threat databases. So coming from my former air background, I'm looking at ITSEC from the air standpoint. Again, I have to have common threat parameters, both air to air and air to ground. So if I'm having an adversary missile flying out in a virtual world, those parameters, those fusing, the kill chain data has to be the same across the services and with our allied partners. Same thing for the ground, so NGIC, in my mind, is the place to do that for the ground database, and Navy for the surface, for the sea and subsurface aspects. So really, my vision is we would see these databases as government-furnished equipment to you folks. Here's the data, here's the standards. I don't care what equipment, I don't care what company produces this stuff. I just need, from an operator standpoint, the folks in uniform who are using these simulators, working in this LV&C environment, we're all working on the same data. This is the partnership then that we need with all of you. Emerging technologies, again, focusing on 5G. 5G is a wonderful example for this because it's the commercial world leading the effort. This is interesting. I see opportunities for us in the DoD. I think most of the people here in this audience are familiar with Lisa Porter's announcement back in the end of October of the USD R&E doing the 5G initiative, looking for, they're going to be looking at 5G capabilities at 4 training locations, and we're going to learn a lot. PNR is involved as part of that, as a part of all of OSD effort. And again, the advantages of what the 5G technology in particular is going to bring. It's the edge computing, the low latency, high speed, ubiquitous connectivity. Think about what those training implications are going to be. It comes back again to what Mr. Matthews said. I think there's opportunity for us to fundamentally change potentially the way we train. We're going to get real-time feedback, and we're going to be able to change training scenarios on the spot for that. Not so much scripted things that we're following a script, because that's kind of where today's technology, today's processes kind of force us to do. But we're going to be having a whole new world open up to us of how we might be able to train and react real time, better replicating what our service members are going to see out in the field. So again, it's a partnership with that we will be looking forward to doing that. How can we use that? How can we take advantage of the commercial capabilities? What can we in the DoD contribute to help set the standards and interoperability aspects? because we do have our own particular concerns from the standpoint of what that technology will allow us to do, but also to protect our own, I'll call it intellectual property, using the commercial term. We have the same issues, same challenges, same concerns that industry does. We just have a little bit different context from the national security aspect. So I believe that there are wonderful opportunities. We're starting to explore those. We're all talking about it. I would encourage you folks to join us this afternoon at 4 o'clock for our hosted 5G discussion to further go down along those lines. But very many exciting opportunities. It is a whole of OSD effort that we're doing. And again, I reach out to you as a partnership to help us move this along and help us learn with you. And from that, I thank you. I'll turn it over then to our fellow distinguished speakers.
All right, thanks, sir. I'm going to rewind back a little bit. 2 years ago, Admiral Robb said that that's when I took over as Air Boss, and it's also about the time when Secretary Mattis came out with his mandate saying, hey, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, readiness of our aviation platforms is not where it needs to be. And he was absolutely right. We had sequestration starting in 2013, so basically 5 years of insufficient budgets, and also continuing resolutions, so the budgets didn't even start on time that we did have. And of course, coupled with a high op tempo, had driven readiness to areas where none of us were proud of. So we, within naval aviation, really jumped on our Super Hornet, which is a workhorse, and it was also the platform that was most challenged. So we have our strike fighters stationed in Oceana, in Lemoore, California, and up in Whidbey Island, Washington, are the main hubs of where that activity occurs. And to give you a sense, we, for almost a decade, had averaged about 250 to 260 mission-capable Super Hornets. Now, we owned over 500 of them. So we were at less than 50%. So for Secretary Mattis to say, hey, let's get at this and let's get at it fast, and you got a year to get our MC rates back to where they needed to be. So we get after it. Now, we didn't get here overnight. We weren't going to get out of it overnight. But what we realized is we had to reform a lot of the way we were doing business. We had to reform the way maintenance was done at our squadrons, at our intermediate levels, in our depots. And so we looked to outside agencies to help us out with this. And primarily it was the civilian aircraft industry that showed us the light and helped us with our reform efforts. Additionally, we were also managing those assets and the repair of those assets in stovepipes and not holistically as an enterprise. And so that became a major part of our reform efforts. So the bottom line, though, is we got up to where we needed to be at 80% mission capable, so from less than 50% to 80% in a very short period of time. Now, I will tell you that a mission capable aircraft is one that can, launch off the pointy end of the aircraft carrier, but is it survivable and is it lethal? And so that's where we're focusing our efforts right now, is to increase, and that's why I like where this, the focus of this year's symposium is into that lethality, because it's critical that our assets are lethal and they're survivable. And so as we start incorporating those components that make our aircraft survivable and lethal into just mission capable, that's again our focus and what we're really excited to be able to do. So we're moving in the right direction. I like that Mr. Drummond brought up the word opportunity, because that's really what we have now, is an awful lot of opportunity. We also have taught ourselves that just doing the things the way we've been doing them, even with new technology, aren't going to drive the results that we really need to be able to move forward, to keep pace and to dominate a rapidly evolving threat. As I look at what's up on the floor and I look at the new technology, I'm excited because we need to incorporate new technology into our tactics, our techniques, our procedures, the way we train at all levels. So Mr. Drummond talked about LVC, live virtual constructive. Certainly that plays a part, a major part, when we start getting into larger exercises. Like for the Navy, our Comp 2X is where we take an entire strike group and we get them ready for their deployment. When we start working at the fleet level, again, great utility. But we need to even take this all the way down to the individual maintainer when they're in boot camp or when they leave boot camp and they're going to their A school. How are they doing things safely? What's their approach to business? How do we train them in a way that, oh, by the way, it's not just taking the same amount of time and costing the same amount of money, but we're getting a better product, a better trained sailor with less time and less money. And so, again, I'm really looking forward to the next couple days as my eyes will be opened up to what those opportunities are, what those potentials are, and I look forward to learning through the questions that I'll get later today in this panel and then questions that we'll get and the dialogue that we'll have over the coming days. So I think I'll pause it there and look forward to the questions.
Hey, thanks. Admiral Rob, thanks for the opportunity to be here. I would say from a training and readiness standpoint, where I'd like to focus today is how the future of training will impact Air Force readiness. Clearly, as Admiral Miller mentioned, we have a variety of near-term readiness issues, but I think the crux of future Air Force readiness rests in this room and in creating the environment that's going to allow not just air crews, but airmen writ large to train in ways that current geography, current capabilities, current threats aren't going to allow us to do the way we've done business in the past. So you've heard in the past, and the Air Force position hasn't changed. Our big picture is we need to move away from standalone, partially integrated systems that did great work getting our air crews where they are today, but get to a point where we're an integrated system of systems. So it isn't one proprietary piece of equipment that stands alone and integrates parts of the time. It's an application that integrates to a common synthetic environment with standard data, with standard threat models that every application uses. This gets to Fred Drummond's comment is, in essence, I need your future device to just be an application that works inside this common synthetic environment so that we're updating one threat database, one terrain database, one weather model, one weapons set of models so that we can change quickly and that the crews that are using this have current, realistic, relevant training experiences. Because when things are one or two iterations behind or they're behind releases of software or technology, you lose the crews. And then ultimately, I don't know if it's a lack of training or it's negative training that they get out of each of those experiences. So moving forward, the Air Force position on that hasn't changed. We're trying to modify how we do business. That requires a little help from those in this room to recognize that closed and proprietary is not the way forward for us. You need to see open and future-proof so that we can both together integrate the changing technologies. My view is we're an extraordinary inflection point for technology and the way we do this business. The next 10 years, I think, will so profoundly change the way we operate and the way we train that my hope is I don't recognize it when I'm up here maybe wearing a suit and tie someday. But to give you a sense of maybe some of the near things, everybody hears about pilot training next. We're still working on that. We start iteration 3 with our third class in January. We're going to expand the applicants, the range of applicants, to see if the concept is scalable to a wide range of students from a variety of backgrounds. So we're not quite sure what scales with that yet, nor do we have necessarily a standard set of technology across all the bases. So we're learning well from that, but I think there's still a ways to go before we can scale that and ultimately do as Admiral Miller says, which is reduce the training time, but improve the quality of the product that gets to the next level of the United States Air Force. You'll see maintenance training next emerge as well. And I think what you're going to see is you're going to see a fair number of small-scale, unit-level opportunities to try and figure out how to do their business better. And the question is, how does the Air Force sustain that over time? And my sense is, as major commands, we'll have to watch what works and what's scalable. But I'd rather let them run right now and innovate and use the technologies that I've seen on the floor here yesterday and at different trade shows to help the young airmen, actually help me and those like me figure out how to make the future work. Because one of the problems I think you'll have is convincing the unconvinced. I've been in and out of this business for 15 years, and there are some folks, I would say like me, that see that we have to change and we have to integrate this technology to be successful at the merge in the late 20s. But there's a group that has seen technology come and go and never quite deliver on what the proposed outcome was. And so I actually need your help getting small-scale wins, and Colonel Rob Epstein and the Air Force Agency for Modeling and SIM are trying to work on that to look at small problems, prove that we can solve those problems so that we can convince the larger enterprise that it needs to put the resources into this. So when you walk into those offices and you're trying to gain the acceptance from whatever organization you're in with the Air Force, I just need you to recognize that there's a fair amount of convincing that needs to do to show that the technology will deliver. And then ultimately, I'm just asking you, when you look at what you're developing, that you plan to do it in an open environment. That's going to change your business model. It's going to change the way we react with you as a business. And that ultimately, I think, will help you and us future-proof some of the products that you're going to provide, so that if we see technology change, if we see a radio change, that there's a way to integrate that new technology while still keeping that system moving. So I think that'll about wrap up my initial comments. I just offer that together at this technological inflection point that we need to change our model a little bit, but ultimately leave ourselves better prepared to train the force of the future. And that's all I have. Thanks, Admiral Rob.
Good morning. My name is Bill, and yes, I am a repeat offender here. I screwed it up last year, so my boss said I had to come back and do it again. Actually, it's a pleasure to be here today because, again, as has been said many times before, we face many of the same challenges, but the folks sitting out here in the audience right now, you're the ones that are going to help us get there. In some cases, you're helping us already. Some of you are aware the Commandant of the Marine Corps put out his Commandant's planning guidance, and it's going to represent major changes for the Marine Corps. What all those changes will be, we're trying to determine right now. We have a number of operational planning teams trying to figure that one out. One thing I will tell you is, for the first time in my time in the Marine Corps, training education is on a par with organization and manning of units, and it's never been that way before. And some might be surprised at that, but we've kind of always been a bill payer because Marines have a tendency to just figure out. We do more with less. Well, it's time now we're not going to do that anymore. So he is going to better resource the training education in the Marine Corps, and what that's going to mean, and some of it we're already doing internally, and this will be going on across the Marine Corps. To get to the things I'm about to describe, we have to divest. So some of the things we're doing now and over the next couple of years, we're not going to be doing in the future. We have to free up money to be able to get to the things I'm about to talk about here in a second. Some of the things that we're going to do, essentially 4 categories: instrumentation, 21st century learning, modeling and simulation, and wargaming. Those are the 4 big things. Then I'll turn it over to the next speaker and look forward to your questions. With regards to instrumentation, one thing we've been very good at is measuring the inputs of readiness. How many aircraft, how many vehicles are up and ready, the manning of units, the supply of units. The one thing we have not been good at in the Marine Corps is measuring the outputs of readiness, which is how are our units doing against their own training standards, measuring their performance in an objective way and be able to provide them feedback. So that means we have to instrument. And of course, as is usual, the Army's well ahead of us on that, so we've been kind of plagiarizing, which is a wonderful thing to do, except in an academic environment, of course. We're learning a lot from them, but we're also learning. We've run a couple different exercises. We've had a couple industry partners help us out. We're learning a lot of things we probably should have known already, but it's that instrumentation piece that shows everything that's going on in the battle space or in the exercise space and able to play that back, whether it's what they're saying, what they're doing, what they're shooting, where it's going. All of that we're building. We just ran an exercise at the end of October, beginning of November, the largest force-on-force exercise we've done in the Marine Corps in many, many years. There were over 10,000 participants in it out there in the desert. There was just an article that came out today in the media report. Force-on-force, we had 8,500 entities, but Marines being as competitive as they are, one of the things we still have not broken the code on is, don't disconnect the battery, okay? Because they don't want to be seen. So we have to get better at that piece. But when we do, we're going to be able to instrument things and show people, okay, platoon commander, okay, company commander, come here, talk to me. Here's what just happened. Talk me through your thought process in that. How did that go? Do in-stride AARs, do end-of-exercise AARs, and maybe most importantly for me and our headquarters at Training Education Command is how do we get the data to identify trends that we then work on and fix. We're really good at observing things, especially things that we screw up. We're not good at fixing them. We like to call ourselves a learning organization, but I'm not convinced that we truly are. When we actually start fixing these things and changing behavior, then I'll agree that we're a learning organization. A way ahead for that instrumentation piece is some of the difficult things that we're unable to do that we can do a modeling simulation now or will be able to soon do, we had to figure out how to do live. We're doing electronic warfare to a degree. We can't do it, obviously, 29 Palms is on the landing patterns for LAX, so they kind of frown on some of the things we'd like to do, spoofing GPS and electronic warfare, but we do some with their permission, with FAA permission. But how do you do ground-to-air, air-to-ground interface from the standpoint of I'm shooting at that aircraft, how do they know? Or that aircraft shooting at the ground, how do they know? Right now, it's controllers going out and telling them, hey, you just got blown up. We've got to find a better way of doing that. So that's some of the way ahead with instrumentation. For 21st century learning, technology, everybody in here knows, is moving very, very quickly. We cannot count on the next fight in having a technological edge. It's not going to happen. In some cases, we're probably going to be very rudely surprised. The important thing is how we deal with that surprise. We have to have the intellectual edge. Our young Marines, all the way down to our lowest levels, have to be able to recognize what's happening in front of them and adapt quickly to whatever's thrown at them. Part of the reason why we're throwing a lot of different things at them that MAGTF warfighting exercise described is to start that process, break out of some of the bad habits we had from Iraq and Afghanistan, more towards peer competitors, more towards some of the curveballs we're seeing out there in the eastern part of Ukraine and other places where people are already operating, the ambiguity that exists on the battlefield. But how do we educate our young Marines so that they understand what's going on around them and don't have to wait to be told what to do? And part of that is my headquarters. A lot of our formal schools, we've kind of kept them in a straitjacket and made them essentially stuck in the industrial age process of training and educating folks, which, as many people know, is very efficient for pushing through large numbers. But if you look at adult learning methodology, it's very apparent that it's the least effective way to get people to learn. That what they retain and what they take with them, what they understand and they retain, it's not good, okay? In some cases, it's less than 50%. So how do we change that model? So one of the things we started with is, and this is with the Commandant right now, we came up with a doctrinal publication, which is our highest level, Marine Corps doctrinal publication. Its title is Learning. Now that might sound obvious, but a lot of our young Marines come in the Marine Corps thinking, okay, I'm done with school, I'm done with all that stuff, I'm never doing that again, okay? Well, that doesn't work. To get to that intellectual edge I was describing earlier, they have to understand they need to be continuously learning and continuously trying to understand what's going on around them and the impact of those things going on around them. So that's what that Learning Marine Corps Doctrine publication is, if the Commandant approves it and signs it, which we hope he will. It's with him right now. But that should set the foundation to get to 21st century learning. And then at all of our schoolhouses, how do we get to problem posing? How do we get to Marines working together? How do we get to a more interactive way of training and educating our Marines so they understand and retain much better than they do right now? Because one of the other things we have a big challenge with is Marines awaiting training. They show up at a schoolhouse, okay, your school doesn't start for another 3 months. How motivating is that? Okay, so we've got to find a way to move away. In some cases, we are. We're providing a syllabus on an electronic tablet to some of these young Marines. It's a self-paced syllabus, and when they demonstrate, and they can work with each other, the instructor's there to coach, teach, and mentor. When they demonstrate the necessary level of competence, they move on. But part of that also is, I think the Navy refers to it as block learning. Okay, what do they absolutely need to know for their entry-level training, and then nothing else. And when they move on to the operating forces, 6-8 months down the road, we deliver them discrete piece of learning to advance their skills. Is that a better way of doing that? And what type of technology we need to do that? That's something else we're exploring. Modeling and standards, modeling and simulation. Our modeling simulation is, I would say, okay right now. Needs to be a heck of a lot better. We're working closely with the Army. In some cases, we're following their lead. In some cases, they're following our lead. But how do we get better at systems interoperating with each other? How do we get better at providing sets and reps for all of our Marines, especially the ones that are operating dangerous equipment, like the ones that fall out of the sky? How do we get them operating with these things so that they understand how it works, what to do, how to work with others very well before they actually climb into the vehicle or into the aircraft? That's what we're trying to get to with modeling simulations. And as I said earlier, some of the things that we're seeing out in the operating environment today, we can't actually do in an exercise environment, but we can do it in modeling and simulation. So we're pretty serious about that. We're developing that. What we'd like to be able to get to the point where, in some places around the United States, it's already existing, actually in places around the world that I've seen, where you have a pilot in a simulator at his home training station, and you've got working with a Marine fire observer at a different location, working with that pilot, and they don't have to be in the same location. They can talk to each other. We'd like to be able to network in exercise participants from all over instead of people traveling to participate like we did with this large MAGTF warfighting exercise. You still need that live force unforced piece. Nothing beats the friction of trying to move people on the ground with weather and all the other things that are going on. But if you can at least simulate as much as possible beforehand, so everybody has a good idea of what's supposed to happen, things will be much better. And lastly, it's the wargaming piece. Right now, we're working on a very large project for the Marine Corps called a Wargaming Center. It's supposed to break ground in 2020 with full operational capability, I hope, by 2024. That's for large-scale unit leader decision-making, wargaming. But one of the things we're talking about now and trying to develop a way forward on is how do we move decision-making, wargaming, all the way down to our lowest levels? How do we take advantage of the fact that we've got a lot of our young Marines on the weekends in the barracks playing video games, stack of pizza boxes, assorted beverage receptacles sitting next to them, and they're already playing video games, okay? Some of them not very productive video games. So how do we take advantage of that and make it competitive? Because again, Marines are kind of competitive. How do we make it competitive so maybe as they increase, they're a team leader, then a squad leader, then a platoon commander, as they increase and they win, they get a score like a chess grandmaster. And they build in the competition over time. But it's all sets and reps. The things they have to do are tactically accurate. It's decision making. It gets at that cognition piece that's the theme of this, this conference. We have to be able to get them making more and more decisions under pressure against a live thinking enemy that is trying to beat them. There's nothing that can replace that because, again, it all goes back to the intellectual edge. So I look forward to your questions, and thanks for coming today.
How's it going? I'm, as mentioned, Brigadier General Steve Michael, Deputy Commanding General at the U.S. Army's Combined Arms Center. 4 deputies in education, training, National Guard, and then there's a civilian SES with General Lundy. I'm the one that's focused on training. So if it touches or enables Army training, is probably tied to me. Live, virtual, constructive. The Army Sustainable Range Program, it's 9,000 plus training aids, devices, simulators and simulations, and all of our division and corps warfighters. So everything that touches Army training. The principal element in my mission statement is to drive change in how the Army trains and prepares for the crucible of ground combat and large-scale combat operations against a peer threat. And as the saying goes, change leads to innovation much more than innovation leads to change. Now, we always know that, it's always important to start with the why. So what's driving the Army's focus? And really, we're back, obviously, in the era of great power competition. As you look at our national strategies, so national security strategy, national defense strategy, national military strategy, probably the best alignment we've seen in our lifetime. The national defense strategy is asking us and the Army to prioritize long-term strategic competition with China and Russia. So, so again, it's about, we're in the era of great power competition. It's about a peer threat, not a near-peer threat. As we look at Russia, today Russia is still probably the only country that's out there that poses an existential threat. Literally, Russia, could represent, the end of days for us, depending on how we contend. China's not there yet, but all estimates are that China will surpass Russia. And there's really the focus, as we look at our strategies, moving us or pointing to the direction that China's probably a long-term, preeminent threat. So both China and Russia see themselves in competition with us, and we're in competition with them, and they're competing in all domains. So this really was driving us, as we see ourselves moving into the future, is fighting and dominating in all domains, hence multi-domain operations. Admiral Davison, the commander of the Indo-Pacific Command, stated there's two areas where China and Russia cannot compete, and there's the area of values. So our values still matter, and our values kind of underpin everything we do in the Army, and then the area of allies and partners. So at the end of the day, we have alliances, folks that have our back, and we have theirs. So as we move forward, the Army as part of a joint force, we see ourselves also operating with allies and partners. So we've got to be able to operate and dominate in all domains, but also interoperable with the joint force and interoperable, with our allies and partners. Now, so what this has led the Army to is to understand that we've got to balance modernization and readiness. At the end of the day, our primary mission is to be ready, to fight and win. And we always, as we talk, there's always a bunch of sports analogies that we like to throw out. And the great thing in sports, I'm a Giants fan, and there's always next year. But obviously, so next year is the year, I can feel it. But the bottom line is, in our profession, if the nation chooses war, there's only one outcome that's acceptable, and is that we win. So our strategy with multi-domain operations is focusing on ensuring that we've got the ability to fight, dominate, and win. And the Army is looking at balancing readiness, because we've got to be ready to fight, with modernization. And the whole intent of standing up and creating our Futures Command is understanding that the character of war is always changing. Really, this whole week today is about a changing character of war. Beginning with Cain and Abel, or some caveman, back in the day, and you can look to the advent of gunpowder, the Roman phalanx, blitzkrieg, air-land battle, multi-domain operations, and all the technology you can talk about. It's all about a changing character of war. And our intent is to stay on the leading edge of the changing character of war. All right, so we can react to change, or we can drive it. So the intent is to drive change and then have everybody else in the planet, every adversary, chasing and following us. All right, so how do we balance readiness? We've got to be ready to fight and win with modernization. And this is really the essential question that we're focused on, that we're trying to answer, was driving the Army as it moves forward. Now let's talk multi-domain operations. And I like to refer to it as both revolutionary and evolutionary. Revolutionary in that I think if we master it, it'll be a great leap forward. And evolutionary as in, the difference between the ape and the man, totally new species. Now, some folks will say we've always been doing multi-domain operations. Even right now, converging the effects of all domains. And yes, just like at one point, the Joint Air Attack Team pulling together, the Joint Air Attack Team used to be something we could do episodically. And it would be a big deal, if you can pull it off maybe once or twice in a particular day. But we're at a point now to where we can pull together and converge elements of the joint air attack team, every couple of minutes, a couple times a minute. I mean, it's happening as required, the ability to converge effects. So what we're looking at with multi-domain operations really is the ability to converge effects of all domains at will and not episodically. And I do think that would be revolutionary. And then for all the mathematicians in the room, the way we would look at multi-domain operations, the way a mathematician would, all right, then it's the factorial process. So right now we think we've got 5 domains, and there's some of us that would say we actually got 6 domains, but let's say 5, all right, air, land, sea, space, and cyber. The 6th would be separating the electromagnetic spectrum from cyber. But a mathematician would frame multi-domain operations like this. 5 factorial. There's 120 unique ways that those domains can interact to solve some tactical problem. If you go to 6, it's 720. If we ever go to 7 domains, 5,040. That truly is what's revolutionary about multi-domain operations. So we don't yet have the full doctrine, the technology, and the thinking to get us there, but that's the vision, and that is where we're heading. So, for the Army, as elements of the multi-domain operations become a reality, we're pulling it into our doctrine, but truly what we're chasing after is maybe a decade away, maybe more. When we master it, think 5,040 potential solutions, some tactical or operational command it can leverage. This truly was revolutionary about multi-domain operations. Now, so we talk revolution in the way we fight. And then for the Army, the revolution in how we'll train, because General Funk would tell you, victory starts here. We win before we show up in the way we train, the way we prepare. Any Bulls fans out there, know Michael Jordan, and you read about him. And if you really read about him, what you find out is, in practice, he was ruthless, unforgiving, and probably not somebody you want to bring home and meet your mom if you read the version that showed up in practice. Not the guy that we see on TV, not the guy that's smiling and winning games, but unforgiving, ruthless, and he understood that they won before they even showed up. So that is our approach. Victory starts here. We think the synthetic training environment is going to be the revolution, for us in training. And what is the synthetic training environment? Really, it's a bunch of things and all things. But it's a thing that we feel is going to merge live, virtual, and constructive. We've always been able to move, kind of left to right. You can take something that's live instrumented, and it'll show up in your virtual and the constructive environment. We've not been able to move consistently, right to left. But we're finally at a point to where you can have virtual entities interact in a credible way, in a realistic way with a live environment. And this is where we're going, to where live, virtual, and constructive will be merged and interchangeable. We see that as the next revolution in training, giving us the ability to truly, for the first time, train the way we intend to fight. The live direction is a big deal. Currently, we use Miles, a laser-based system to kind of adjudicate our interaction, and it's been good, maybe even a little bit great, but it's not what's required. There's so much of our capabilities that cannot be replicated. So as we move and in the synthetic training environment, we're also looking to revolutionize how we do live, moving away from laser-based, moving to some network-based or other solution that truly replicates the capabilities of our weapon systems, and for the first time gives us the ability to fight the way we intend to train. When you train with Miles, there's some things, it teaches a little bit some bad lessons. You got lasers that can't go through leaves, can't go through walls. So you can learn some bad lessons that you've got to unlearn when you do force and target, and you've got to unlearn on combat when you're fighting against a thinking, breathing enemy, and where he's not looking to die for the cause any more than we are. So we're moving in the direction of the synthetic training environment, and we've got a big time and a heavy focus on live. Then I'll finish up real quick, and I could start with this or end with this, but the other part is important to reinforce what this is all about. So you started off saying large-scale combat operations. So ultimately, what we're talking about and what we're discussing is about war. And the two things that's always in contention is the character war, and we talked about the fact that it's always changing, but the thing that is unchanging, immutable, we think, is the nature war. And the nature war is atavistic, brutal. You win by taking it. It's a contest of wills. And all the stuff we deliver on the character war has to contend with the nature war. The character war has to bow to the nature war. All right, so it's got to be able to, the stuff we deliver, that you deliver, it's got to be able to survive human contact. It's got to be able to survive fog and friction. It's got to be able to operate in degraded domains, and then it's got to survive Murphy. So the nature war, at the end of the day, is going to be won by folks like us. Somebody's going to reach out and take it. It's not going to be given. And if we deliver stuff that works in a nice, pristine environment, that's great. But if it can't work in the mud and the blood, it's going to be of no use, because at the end of the day, in large-scale combat operations, what comes to the fore is the nature war. And with that, I'll stand by for your questions.
Thank you, and it's always has to be a Latvian that finishes up the panel. 1 year ago, I had the pleasure to command a multinational full combat-ready brigade consisting of 10 nations, 200 kilometers from Russia, under direct InfoOps influence at every day. That was fun. But then again, the force is strong in my family. And now, because of my sins, I am the Assistant Chief of Staff of Joint Force Development at ACT up in Norfolk. Been doing that for 4 months, and I'm already a veteran in NATO's terms. So NATO, what is NATO? NATO is trying to harnessing the power of 29 nations, soon to be 30. Winston Churchill once said that there's only one thing worse than fighting with allies, and that's fighting without allies. And as my previous speaker already mentioned, allies are here. So we better make it happen, make it better and good. This year's theme of this conference is very interesting for myself and for the Alliance, the winning the war of cognition, particularly now when NATO has adopted its first NATO military strategy in decades. And the ACT is currently drafting the subordinated NATO warfighting capstone concept. With this effort, the Alliance is focusing to maintain a 70-year-old battle-winning concept. To continue, I would like to remind you a little bit about what NATO is and it isn't. Well, the NATO command structure is actually just a bunch of staff officers, NCOs, and civilians. I have a Spanish admiral as my boss, and I have a list there. I have 2 Italians subordinated, 1 Pole, 1 Brit, 2 United States Army and Marine Corps, and 1 German. And that is what makes NATO interesting. It's the power and the challenge of 29. It's the members, the people, and it is also the countries, the militaries. So we have to distinct that NATO as a staff, command structure, and the alliance as 29 member nations. And harnessing that power is, of course, a trick. Now, the NATO warfighting capstone concept is a working in progress, hopefully to be delivered to the nations next year in December. But already now, me as the Assistant Chief of Staff for Joint Force Development is to see what it means for the warfighter for the future. And here are some considerations. First of all, it's all about understanding, or at least anticipating, the future. Understanding the contemporary environment is hard enough nowadays, as technologies are changing faster than ever before. And those available already today are not yet fully understood. I'll use an analogy. This is always a difficulty and challenge. The armies of 1914 entering World War I all had machine guns, but still the belligerent armies still favored the offense. They attacked with their infantry in formation and suffered enormous casualties as a result. To note is that the belligerents knew about the machine gun, but did not know or did not want to know or anticipate the consequences. Current emerging multi-domain thinking addresses far more complex interactions. But then here's my point. We do not need to dwell on how a machine gun operates, but instead of understanding or at least anticipating the emergent interactions between modern technologies, domains, and platforms. During 1914 to 18, the machine gun's unforeseen interactions with culture, doctrine, training, massed mobilization, barbed wire, and weight of artillery fire, defensive trench tactics, and partially mechanized logistics was what made it such a killer. In this aspect, we need to be able to outthink our opponent in regards to the possibilities of emerging technologies. So it's not the platform, it's what it can do and interaction with others. Of course, the trick is to determine what is and what is not relevant in ever time-compressed space which technologies gives us. With this in mind, we need leaders and units that can outpace our opponents. I already talked about adaptation, and as a fan of Clausewitz, I'll continue. To survive and to be relevant on the future battlefields, military units have to be able to adapt as the nature or character of future conflicts changes. Pace is important, but mastering adaptation is as important. As the chameleon adapts with the environment, so must units during conflict, not between conflicts, but during conflict, and leaders with them. Mental and physical agility over time will be vital as it enables leaders to adapt and thus outfight their opponent cross-domain as the situation develops. Modern sensors, AI technologies will enable everyone to see much more than any has seen in previous wars or conflicts. The trick is to understand what is important. And also, to continue, we need to be able to outlast our opponent. Future battlefield participants will have to work with fluctuating C2 availability in a denied or partially denied environment. They will have to be also ready to switch on their C4-2i systems and switch on again if necessary and when you can. This automatically requires future junior leaders to be authorized to make appropriate decisions. Additionally, many multi-domain functions will have to be decentralized with delegated authority. And this probably means a return to real mission command, right? Well, we need leaders, junior leaders especially, to out-excel their opponents. And this brings me to my final point here about human capital enhancement. The military leader of the future will have to prioritize and focus actions more than ever, as the possibilities provided by emerging technologies will be immense. The constant interaction of the what I want to do, what I should do, and what I can do, Trinity, is of course constantly changing, the constant interaction of these three factors. Controlling or commanding full multi-domain operations will be a significant challenge for any country, any nation. Perhaps focusing on multi-domain anticipation or multi-domain mission command is more relevant for less resourced nations. With most certainty, technologies will assist, but it's the preparation of our human capital that is paramount. NATO takes its human capital from allied members. I am being lent from Latvia to NATO for a 3-year tenure. And we need to be best at taking care of them and bring out the best within the arguably short tenure of 3 or 4 years or less when allied members take part as team members of a command structure. It's all about getting the 29, soon to be 30 nations to be able to talk to each other and not about each other. The use of modeling and simulation across levels of NATO is required, and we're doing it. We're working on introducing technology and innovation at the highest levels of NATO to include exercises with ambassador-level decision makers at NATO headquarters in Brussels. Technology in education and training is vital to our ability to reach and train both our NATO staff as well as our nations who support NATO with troops. E-learning has been a great success so far. I myself was a great student 11 years ago when I prepared for Afghanistan, and now I'm, funny enough, in charge of it. Virtual classrooms, micro-learning, immersive learning, on-demand training, and reduced travel it will and is helping the Alliance already, but we need to become better of it and you see what is there. I will finish of mentioning my boss. It's always a battle-beating concept, I think. So I'm here on I would like to extend my greetings to this conference from my boss, General Lanata, the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation. And I quote him, "Many technologies are already out there, available for us. The question is, what does it take to adopt them? The answer is, in my view, we need to change our people's culture and skills, our processes, and our organizations. We also need to take in account the cognitive dimension of the interactions between men and machines. I'm not only talking about the questions of man-machine interface raised by the growing complexity of our systems here, but also about the key question of confidence in the machine." Thus, the Supreme Allied Commander Transformation. So I'm looking forward for interesting interaction. NATO has a booth there, 2173. Come and see us. And thank you for having and hosting this fantastic conference. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're in trouble. We've got 1,200 people in the room. I think we got 1,200 questions, so this is, I apologize in advance if we don't get to it. I'll start with a couple of small ones here, small balls, a couple related, aimed specifically or targeted or inviting Major General Jacobson's opinion. Questions generally says, is the Air Force prepared to accept security risks associated with moving joint connected simulation to the cloud?
I guess you want me to answer that?
Yes, sir. Not unless you don't.
No, I guess my point, my comment would be there are some policy issues we need to work through, but it gets back to my comment about convincing the unconvinced, right? There's a percentage of the senior leaders that are reticent to believe that the technology exists. So demonstrating in small scale the ability to do that and do it in a way that protects that data, I think will be necessary to watch the migration of all that data. That's, I guess, what I'd have at this point, Admiral.
Okay, any other comments?
I think security overall is, you know, we're getting to a point now where we're pretty much all SAP all the time. And so how do we, you know, you asked about challenges. That's one of our challenges. And Mr. Drummond brought up ranges. So how do we have that interoperable training where an Air Force F-22 and a Navy Super Hornet and a Marine Corps F-35B are working together over Nellis Range and the Fallon Ranges, and we're doing the training that we need to be able to do in an LVC type environment and do it, you know, multi-domain and multi-security and have that protected. And so that is a challenge that we acknowledge and are working our way through and certainly can use help with.
The only other thing I'd offer is, you know, for the last 15 years, I've seen this security issue evolve, in some ways good, in some ways less good, and to the Admiral's point, part of it is we're in our own way, but at the same time, there are certain things that we have to protect, and we need industry's help to figure out the technological solutions to balance both sides of that coin, which gets to my point of trying to find ways to demonstrate small scale that you can do it so that we can scale it for the enterprise.
Okay, there are several questions here about cybersecurity and policy. Specifically, can you further address the effects of the ongoing cybersecurity efforts as a as a negative within the training domain? And for Mr. Drummond, do you see any policy changes coming down the road that are going to make it better or worse?
From that standpoint, I cannot speak for Undersecretary of Defense for policy, so I won't. But I think from the reality where I sit from a training education standpoint, it's part of the reality. It's the world we live in. We have to deal with it. And I think our input to policy and others is really we need to understand, we need to provide them the operator input, is basically my opinion on that. What does it really mean? What are the impacts? And then we can have a risk discussion from that. Not a real helpful answer, but it's a very difficult subject, obviously.
Yeah, there's a great deal of tension right now with regards to what we'd like to do and what we're going to be allowed to do with regards to IT policy. And one of the things that I look at it and try and see it with both hands from the standpoint of our IT policy folks. They're trying to defend networks that are under attack all the time. When you're under attack all the time, your willingness to accept vulnerabilities is about zero. But one of the things we have to realize is there's no such thing as a foolproof network. We have to be resilient. We have to take some risks. I believe we're behind with regards to cyber technology because of our IT policies and trying to protect everything as hard as we can, when I think that's an impossible job.
To add, I think, since we talk about domains, so cyber is a domain, and so a defensive approach is great, but we know that there's no such thing, to piggyback on what General Mullen said, no such thing as a perfect defense. Somebody's going to find a way through. So yes, we've got to put a lot of assets and resources into securing and protecting the network. We also have to think of the domain like any other domain and the ability to maneuver in it. Do analysis of, given the enemy's capabilities, here's what he can do. How do we protect against those, but not just focus on having the Maginot Line, which we know will fail. And then with the policy approach, you have to have the ability to take risks. I mean, it's like you can easily say swimming is forbidden, so that nobody drowns. There's one way to make sure nobody drowns, but there's probably other ways to where you can enjoy the benefits of swimming and not come up with something that's draconian. So a lot of times it's all about we're trying to prevent failure. That is impossible, but we end up, hamstringing ourselves. So we have to have that balance.
Okay, the next question talks about synthetic environments. There's another pile of questions here related to this. And it said it seems that the services are embracing the idea of using synthetic environments in training, and it's moving forward. However, they are developing unique LVC, STI environments. What needs to be done to bring these efforts together?
Could you say that again?
We're all creating synthetic environments like DMON, STI, the Navy has their own NCTE. Are there any efforts that would bring the protocols, the interaction, the integration together?
Yeah, so the ones that you mentioned, the answer is yes. The ones that you mentioned, DMON and NCTC, that already is being worked at Nellis and Fallon area, and it's a matter of just, there are protocols and, if you will, mechanisms to tie those together. And so I don't have the details of that other than the reports I get are that it's fairly successful. You're right, though, that historically we, Air Force, Marine Corps, Navy, give us one problem, we'll come up with 3 different solutions. And so you heard General Wilson earlier today talking about, the whole integrated C2 as being a combined priority at the, 4-star level of our services. And we're all behind that. And I think we'll continue to see that level of cooperation and integration migrate all the way into our acquisition processes as we move forward. Jake, anything else you'd say on that?
Admiral, I think what I'd offer is we also have this entity called the Joint Synthetic Environment, right, which both our services, well, I guess all 3 are using to test certain things. And as that environment expands, I see us leveraging that to the broader common environment I talked about. So to get after by definition being joint now, as we grow that and use the lessons we learn from that, I think you'll see that our services will be able to conduct the training we need in a joint synthetic environment. But my sense is the man who oversees it all probably might have a comment or two about how we get all the services together.
Well, that's what we're looking at from what control does OSD staff, not SecDef, so I'll bring it down a level or three. What power, what control, what direction does OSD have? Policy. So we are developing policy. Fred's personal opinion, we absolutely are behind. A very difficult situation for this. The services have not waited for OSD, nor should they have when they're dealing with challenges to increase capabilities. So therefore, we have programs that have been put in place and developed over years, but they have been from a service-centric standpoint. So now we, I believe, and OSD need to catch up and provide that larger strategic direction. And my staff is actually working on those very things with some suggestions of how we might go forward. So we may see some stuff published. My goodness, I don't want to predict a publication date because it takes 18 to 24 months to actually publish or update a DoD instruction, which kind of speaks to our business transformation challenges that our NDS has identified as one of our three attributes. So we're working on all those things, but really it is kind of from a top down, hey guys, work together, we have to be interoperable. So it goes back to my themes of interoperability and commonality. It has to start from the start from the very beginning, but we have to, everything we do now, I believe, must be based on that vision that it has to be interoperable.
Okay, appreciate that. I have another set of questions that sort of discuss the migration of a lot of classified training to simulation, to the things that you are going into the SAP and such. So if you have any comments about, specifically on the air side here, what are the trends with regard to live training versus simulation in the aviation world? Typically it was very culturally biased towards live training, but do you see, because of the necessity to do some real full-up training in simulators, a percentage change in the amount that we're using simulators in our syllabus?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll also say, the quality of the simulators are a lot different than when you and I were, starting this business. So I'll give you an example. As we started up our F-35C business and we said, how many simulators do we need? We kind of relied on, again, the way we were doing things with our Super Hornets. And we weren't thinking the SAP piece when we were doing it. We were mostly thinking, how many simulators do we need? And so what do we look at is our fleet readiness squadrons, our training squadrons, which is the predominance of our F-18 simulators. The fleet squadrons very seldomly use the simulators. It's all done for our fleet training, and then after that, if you're doing a NATOPS check or you're doing an instrument check, you'll do that in a simulator, and the rest of your work is all done live. Well, what we found out was, about 50% of our training in the F-35 is in the simulator, and we needed to increase our simulator capacity because every single fleet squadron is going to be driving in on the simulators. So it is a complete mind shift change that takes into account the quality of training, the type of training, and certain things that we do want to protect. Now when you connect those simulators onto other simulators, now that's what we're driving with at Fallon, which is where we do our air wing training. And we have a complete air defense simulation facility out there where we have multiple F-35, F-18, and even Aegis cruiser destroyer simulators all connected up to do air defense, fleet air defense type missions. Combine that now with what we can put out on the range, and now we're getting into true LVC across the board and injecting constructive threats into, cockpits. It's exciting stuff. And so, that environment, which Mr. Drummond talked about, we've all kind of mentioned LVC, but I think we're just scratching at the beginnings of what really the potential is for how we can train in the future.
Sir, what I would offer is just a couple points. Is obviously the Air Force remains, live's not going away, right? But to my point of we need to prove that there are things that you can do and do well in the virtual and constructive world is where I need your help. But ultimately, we're committed to range modernization, but kind of the fusion of the virtual and constructive. Your service has done some good work, our service has done some good work, and I think moving together arm in arm on how you fuse the live with the virtual constructive is important. But ultimately, I think what our younger fifth gen service members are seeing is that they need the synthetic environment in order to practice everything that we're going to ask them to do, just because of what I talked about, geographic limitations and security limitations.
Yep.
Right.
For the NATO perspective on this one is, of course, the challenge of, we also fully recognize the challenge of the classified network dilemma vis-a-vis training, exercise, and education. We're looking for best practices across the member nations because we need to become more adaptable, that's for sure. We get new ideas, we have new platforms, but then again, we are not allowed to put it on or off the networks. And then, of course, how much do we actually want to share amongst the alliance? It's a policy question, of course. But we're looking for best practices.
Hey, Rookie, if I could add, another thing that this environment allows us, and I kind of use the term, be good all the time. We tend to, within the Navy, we tend to take our strike groups and we'll go through the various OFRP where you're going through the maintenance phase into the basic phase and you work your way up. When we truly have the opportunity to have that high-end environment that we can jump into synthetically or through simulators to be able to join, even with those that are deployed or out, out at sea or we can be good all the time. And that ultimately, I think, is the type of readiness that, again, the potential here is, it's at our grasp.
Right. Okay, for Mr. Drummond, I have, and also for General Mullen, that you mentioned wargaming and gaming in general. What are are you familiar with concepts of massive multiplayer online gaming, and have you considered tapping this sort of entertainment industry capability into warfighter training?
You want to start?
Yes, I'm aware, and yes, we're trying to tap into it. We'd love to do that.
I've got the same answer. We're absolutely aware of that. Each of the services are working wargaming aspects. My office is working, not really ready to expose it publicly yet, but we are looking at ways to increase, enhance, expand wargaming across the board and really put well, it's really under the rubric of lethality and readiness, make it meaningful. And it's not necessarily mission rehearsal type or what ifs, but from my standpoint, one of my other hats for a joint professional military education / strategic thinkers / critical thinking aspects, really want to train the mind. So give them scenarios. So we have folks who've been given a whole bunch of different things using technology, using wargaming, massive, I'll call it online, but massively connected, absolutely. So we're on board. We'll get there eventually. Again, I will put no prognosis on a date, though.
I'll just add that we are trying to get more towards the tactical realism capabilities that they'd actually have to deal with, less of the first-person shooter entertainment type things. That's where you start running into some challenges because then you're trying to redesign things, and that's where the price tag goes up. So it's where we need to go, but the hard part is how do you get there?
To add a couple points, so for quite some time, the Army's been, working in this terrain. We've got our, virtual battlefield simulation that's kind of a first-person, simulation game that we use at a tactical level. So companies, troops, and at the battalion level, and also our warfighters, also kind of leverage this similar capability. Our joint land component constructive capability, which is our simulation that underpins it, and the warfare simulation also kind of leverages that capability. But as we look at STEED, that is exactly where we're trying to go to get to the point where we've actually got credible first-person virtual virtual simulation, so we have the ability to train at the squad level and add credibility, but then also train at the, battalion, brigade, and division level. Because typically, if you try and train at all those levels, somebody's time is being wasted, and especially, the soldier on the ground. STE and this kind of gaming gives us the ability to have credible training at each level, and not be wasting, elements time.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the war for talent. So on the air side, we have the airlines are manning up for a huge exodus and refill. We also have the Air Force has significant challenges in pilot manning, and I know it's a little less, I think, on the Navy side, but what do you see in terms of the future and what you're doing about digging deep for the competing with the airlines and the other services?
You want to start, and I'll follow this time?
All right. So as we look at, if you go back in time from the hiring surge in 78 and 88 and 98 to today, there's clearly a cyclical nature to this. Our 2019 retention rates were on par with 18. I don't know if that continues. We see the civilian hiring draw staying strong through probably the mid-20s, even into 2026. So we're doing everything we can, I would say, from a retention standpoint at the individual level to understand what the airman needs. Because for some, it's family issues, right? When probably most of us joined the service here, it was a single breadwinner, spouse evolved along, found jobs where it worked for that family, but now you have a two professional spouse set of airmen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, and that environment is different and it's more difficult to retain. I would say that we're seeing that the unrelenting op tempo is always in the top three of what's forcing folks to leave, not necessarily the draw of a higher paying job. It's literally the pace, it's what the family needs, it's moving a little bit less. So we're working at the individual level to retain as many as we can, but recognize there is a cyclical nature to this. On the production side, I would say this gets to pilot training next, maintenance training next, trying to strengthen how we train, but shorten the time to train, to expand production to deal with the projected departures over the next 5 to 10 years. And so the one thing I didn't mention in my opening remarks is as we do that, there's a learning analytics piece that we're still trying to figure out. There's some extraordinary experts in the room. There's some great folks in my service and our services, but as you leverage that to figure out how to make the training that we are doing more effective, do it faster so we can get soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines to the flight line sooner is really how we're trying to improve the talent and retain the talent on the backside, so to speak.
Yeah, so we track the Air Force very closely because they seem to provide us our leading indicators of issues that will affect us. A lot of the dissatisfiers that Jake just mentioned have always been there, will always be there, and what I'll tell you, though, that I've seen recently with our strike fighter pilot retention issues is it's directly tied to readiness. Folks were enjoying our service for the excitement and the ability and the opportunity to fly. And when readiness is at a point where they're not able to do what they joined to do, then that's going to be the major dissatisfier. So what we have seen is as our readiness is improving, we are seeing retention improving. Not to the levels that I'm confident and comfortable with, but we are seeing that direct correlation. So what are the things we do about it? A couple things. Obviously, bonuses are a tool that we use. Additional things are career options. Because of that dual military family, it used to be looked upon negatively if you would homestead, if you will. Well, hey, if your spouse has that job, that may be the difference maker. So you don't now have to move all of a sudden to make yourself look attractive. We've incorporated certain programs for folks that, let's say, they don't want to command a squadron, but they still really want to fly. Hey, I'll let you be a flight instructor for a 20-year career, and I'll pay you as an 04 to finish out for 20 years. So professional flight instructor programs. Career intermission options, educational opportunities that just didn't exist before are really making the service and the ability to fly and still do the things that you'd like to do as a person or as a family more attractive. And then ultimately, it's just, and I hate to put it, and don't want to downgrade anybody that's flying in airlines, but you know what, flying tactical aircraft for the military is pretty friggin' cool. And so there is that as well. So that just the draw of service and the opportunity to serve and the opportunity to have an exciting, rewarding career that naval aviation and aviation in general and military service writ large provides is still a huge draw.
One add on the Army side. So much like our teammates, placing a priority in our people is number one. So the Chief of Staff at the Army, he came in, mentioned his number one priority is our people. We have What's Our Worry campaign, highlighting our 116 plus, military occupational specialties, both for enlistment, but also retention and the ability for folks to, once enlisted to move, within those specialties. On the officer side, for the first time, we've created this marketplace. So typically, you're informed by your branch manager, here's the job we're sending you to. You're not allowed to see behind the curtain. For the first time, you can actually see the entire marketplace. Here are all the jobs that are available. You have the ability to then compete for those jobs, and then the units have the ability to reach out and select you. In addition to your evaluation reports, you now have the ability to fill out, here are my talents, here are some of my strengths and weaknesses. So it becomes, much more kind of a clear dialogue. And even though it's in its beginning stages, the feedback, from across the force, is a lot of optimism because you now feel that you've got a little bit of play in kind of shaping your destiny. The other thing we're doing that's helping with talent. So for the first time, we're starting our battalion command assessment, and battalions really being kind of the linchpin unit that kind of runs and fights and drives the Army. And typically the way we assess those commanders was based on their evaluation reports. So we hold these centralized boards. They look at the reports and then pick the commanders. I mean, I do think it's a fair and incredible process, but we're transitioning into the reports to kind of get you to the assessment, and then we've got a comprehensive assessment. There'll be 800 plus folks competing in both physical, mental, psychological, in-person assessments. So we're looking at doing things that number one, make sure we choose the right folks, but do things in a way to where the force feels that they've got a chance and they've got a say in what they do achieve and the ability to shape their own destinies.
We're running out of time, but I've got a couple here that I'd like to see the answers to. One of them involves machine intelligence, big data analytics, and AI. The fact that they have great promise to radically change learning systems and improve readiness in many ways. The services or anyone on the panel have any thoughts about how your service or entity is approaching these sort of new age technologies?
I'll hit it real quick. First off, machine to machine, as we start talking manned-unmanned teaming, heck, your video showed, that in action. But take it to the next level where things that help us get inside of an adversary's OODA loop where machine to machine analytics is occurring absolutely is a plus. On data analytics, that's been the basis, and I'll call it data-driven decision-making and data analytics has been the basis of our whole readiness recovery. It's all based on decisions that are not just, hey, the person with the most stars is making the decision. It's, hey, the data is leading us in the direction that we need to go. So clearly a huge driver for us. One caution, though, you got to be really careful as you pick whatever metrics you're driving for, because those metrics will drive behaviors. And you want to make sure that you're creating healthy behaviors. I'll pause since I know you're on a short timeline. Let others pitch in.
Yeah, we're pursuing it also. We've got a lot of data. Not all of it's good. But we would like to be able to use it to get better, get more ready, objectively measure readiness and get after it. So we have people pursuing that. What it needs to exactly look like, we're not sure. Always looking for recommendations.
On the Army side, again, also likewise, there's a bunch of data that we collect. So, for example, all our combat training centers, we've been doing for over a decade plus, a bunch of engagements, real life thinking, breeding, fighting, blue force against an opposing force. How do we leverage that data? So it's about collecting it, storing it in a central location so folks can access it, and then using it to simulate or to stimulate war games, experimentation, and then even training of our folks, like our intelligence professionals, instead of developing scenarios off the top of our head, using real data to drive the scenario generation. So we do see some great applicability. We just got to get better at collecting it. And what we don't yet have, similar to one world terrain that we're chasing after, we need to have a central database repository so everybody has the ability to access it, depending on your purpose.
NATO is, we currently are exploring using artificial intelligence in order to harness the Power 29. The previous, let's say the analysis of documents available is still man-driven, and now we are entering the machine reading of it, and then also in 29 languages. There's a difference between English and American as well. The next attempt for the strategic foresight analysis will harness more than thousands, tens of thousands of documents in different languages in order to really harness the Power 29.
Okay, last question, which is my standard last question, is how best can industry help you if you have like one or two things that throw out there that would really be helpful? What would they be?
Continuing the dialogue, from my standpoint, is need to know what's out there. You need to know from us what our needs and concerns are, how we operate. So again, from my standpoint, it's the continued dialogue and partnership.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think we have an awful lot to learn, and as opposed to us just directing, hey, here's how we do things and help us do it with new technology. So I'd say on that line, on the training aspect, help us train better, train quicker, and train cheaper.
So I'll get back to what my comments were in my opening remarks. Is the key word is open. We need your acceptance that change in how we do business and using single data, authoritative data sources to drive the entire synthetic enterprise, I think is important. And then recognize that you're going to see a bunch of small little startup enterprises across our unit level, and I still think there's great value in that. You're probably going to have to help them think about how you scale that, right? They'll all be focused on their individual problem, but ultimately we have a broader enterprise to manage through, and so as you help them think through that, that will be helpful to us as a service.
The only thing I would say is ideation. There's a lot of times we're not really sure exactly what we're looking for or how to get there, and industry in many cases may already have an answer or something that may look like the answer that can help us get there, and that's what we're looking for.
I'd reinforce on the common protocols and open architecture, the ability for whatever you work in, the ability for it to interact with other things. So we get to the point where we don't have to pour good money after bad, because as we have some capability, we got to spend more than it's worth to pull something else in. So common protocols and open architecture, and I think they'll push us in the right direction.
And I would conclude with that, since, yes, exactly, it's about be able to talk to each other. the machines and software and protocols, and not about each other. But then I would also like to do a personal there, as my boss said, drive the confidence in the machine. Because personally, I still do have a Alexa versus HAL challenge. Thank you.
Okay, well, with that, we'll conclude the panel. I think that this is a rich panel. They'll be around today and many of them, throughout the week. So I appreciate you taking the time to maybe seek them out if you have additional questions of the other 1,150 that I didn't get to. But please help me thank our panel and okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.